A coalition of civil society organizations has faulted the Electoral Act 2026, claiming the new law has loopholes that could undermine the 2027 polls. The coalition, including Yaga Africa International Press Center and the Kuka Center, stated this in Abuja following the presidential assent to the Electoral Act 2026. The organizations describe the law as a missed opportunity for the transformative electoral reform that Nigeria requires and that Nigerian citizens deserve.
Still on matters arising from the Electoral Act Amendment Bill signed into law by President Bola Tinubu, we're now joined by Ememobong, PDP National Publicity Secretary, and Oba Madwa Abuchi, a senior advocate of Nigeria. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for joining us on Newsnight. I guess we're not about to hear the last of this electoral contentious or controversial electoral bill. But where do we start? Oba Madwa Abuchi, you are the senior advocate of Nigeria. Yes. Before we get to the political, reactions, let's even look at the legality, the constitutionality of this electoral law that has been passed by President Bola Tinubu. On the one hand, some argue that the so-called Form EC8A would be the primary source when it comes to litigation in court. And while others say, look, the e-transmission really should be the #1 primary, mode of resorting when it comes to litigation. Well, help us unpack and understand, all of this.
Thank you very much, Ngozi. You see, we have gone this route before.
Right.
When we had card reader, the Supreme Court said card reader is not in the Electoral Act. But he went further to say that no, then there was a time we wanted to do elections, and the National Assembly said you must do presidential election first, if you remember. And they said you can't tell INEC how to do elections. You cannot. It is INEC that decides how to conduct an election, not the National Assembly. You cannot tell INEC you must transmit electronically. You can't. Because Section 153 of the Constitution sets up INEC, not the Electoral Act. That's one mistake people make. It is not the Electoral Act that set up INEC. It is Section 153 of the Constitution. Then Section 160 gives INEC the power to assign responsibilities. Then Schedule 3, Paragraph F, 15, clearly says INEC shall have the power to organize, undertake, and supervise elections for the president, Senate, all elections in Nigeria, outside local government elections.
Right.
If they are to organize, the Constitution gives them the power. Can a lesser legislation now come and say, don't organize, do it this way? That is where the problem is. You cannot, when they have been told, organize, undertake, then you are now saying, don't organize, we organize for you.
So in other words, the electoral law is not exactly in tandem with what the Constitution
recommends. Exactly. So when people say you must do e-transmission, real-time, online, it is what we all want. But then the Constitution says something different. That it is INEC. If INEC says we want to do it real time, it will be in tandem with the Constitution. But if the National Assembly says you must do it real time and electronically, no, it is not constitutional.
Interesting. Ememobong, you released the statement. And you called this this amendment a treacherous betrayal of Nigerians. Your exact words. Some will even ask, which PDP are you speaking for? But hey, go to the question, don't mind me. And respond to what he says.
Yeah, clearly, but you would know that we're speaking for the PDP that is the main PDP. You do know those who are an annexure. Everyone, there's no hiding again. The masquerade is off. The mask is off the masquerade. So you do know those. There are some former members of PDP who are an annexure of the APC. So we speak for the real PDP.
Okay.
Now, going to that, as my learned senior advocate has said, The question is in the interpretation, which is why the judiciary is there. Lenesuk would also recall that the judiciary itself has laid emphasis when we went to the card reader and even the last election with the beavers, where they said that the beavers and the IREF, you know, posting election results, there is merely a viewing portal, and that it does not have legislative parentage, because that INEC is empowered to make guidelines, and that in the hierarchy of laws, that a subsidiary legislation of the nature that INEC is making cannot, if not imputed in the principal act. So the clear disposition that there is a cacophony of issues here, you know, the one that has to do with the judiciary. But first is the fact that the legislative house is first a delegate of power. And that delegation that has been done to them is done by the constituents. Majority of the constituents who throw ballots have put them there. And therefore, in an agent-principal relationship, the agent must be reflective of the principal. When you go to legislative best practices globally, there is what is called mirror representation, meaning that the representative must be a mirror of whom he or she is representing. So when you take that and situate it with what is happening here, public hearings were held across the country, stakeholder groups met and agreed. This work has been going on for more than 2 years, and agreed all of the issues brought were galvanized and argued at those forums, or at those fora. And an agreement with the senators, with the House of Reps, with the stakeholders came to say, to deepen democracy by electoral sanctity, the sanctity of the ballot. Because the last election, only 26% of the people who registered to vote. The registration to vote is an intention, is an initial announcement of an intention to vote. Right. Actually going to vote is now an expression of faith or disbelief in the system. And so out of 100%, only 26% express faith in the process. And if you talk to people, why don't people vote? They say, our votes won't count. And so they sat back and said, what are the sociological issues, the political issues, the legal issues that have led to this? And a review was done and said, look, if people can be sure that what happens at the polling unit is what is transmitted, then people will be happy. In fact, at that point, if Lenesuk wins me in an election, I can shake him, because at the point, immediately there is close of ballots and we transmit those elections via real time via the beavers. All of us would know. He would know whether he has won or I have won. And at that point, I can place a call and say, man, there's no need going further. But as long as we continue to harbor, because now elections have left, that's why people are no longer taking ballot boxes to run. How do they rig elections now? Why are people afraid of electronic transmission real time? Now, let me show you. Because with collusion with some members in INEC, they are going to print the same serial with election results, EC8A, 8A, and they are going to use the same serialized number. So you're going to find 2 result sheets. And they are going to come to say they are going to adopt the one. So what do? They call the person who is at the polling unit and say, what's the total number of accreditation? Because Beaver's accreditation will now capture the total number. But because it is manual voting, it cannot sort the votes. So they will now take that accreditation digit and now fill a form in their houses. Some of them have had histories of putting result sheets in buses in their houses in 21, 28 local government areas and trying to submit it. So that is what is going to happen. Because now, why the proviso?
You know of a plan that is about to happen.
But it has happened before. That is why the people are very afraid. If you go back in history to check even the cases of the people who are virulently opposed to this, you would see that, just read the case and see how they arrived at where they are, or what stopped them from going there.
How do we resolve this trust deficit? Because that seems to be what is fundamental here. What does INEC do to show Nigerians that, look, we're on top of our game, we're going to provide or, carry out a transparent election that will be acceptable to at least a huge majority of Nigerians? How do we resolve this issue? And beyond this section 60, are there other salutary aspects of this electoral law that's just been passed?
You see, actually, there has nothing really been wrong with our electoral laws.
Okay.
What has been wrong, even if you like, bring British America, what has been wrong is implementation. Like my friend said, somebody is sitting in his house. He calls you on the phone. Oba Ward, yes. How many people were accredited? 200. Then he gives himself 180 and gives the other party 20. It is not the law that is wrong now.
So how do we fix that?
So the thing is, electronic transmission of votes is an imperative. But it is not possible in Nigeria today because of the position of the Constitution. The Constitution gives the sole power of organizing elections to INEC. Organize, undertake, and supervise. You cannot now tell them what to do. That's where we have a problem. So we must go back and amend section 160 and then paragraph schedule 3
of the Nigerian
of the Constitution. Remove that power to be the sole. Let them organize as prescribed by the Electoral Act. If you don't say they are to organize elections as prescribed by the Electoral Act, once you give them that discretion, that complete autonomy, there is no way you now make a subsidiary legislation like the Electoral Act, and it will override the Constitution.
Okay.
So
but let's remember that, yes, Section 1 sub 3, which talks about supremacy and inconsistency. Yeah. But however, in case law, which we have seen, which we've participated, you see that INEC, for example, in 2015, 2019, 2023, with the introduction of technology, INEC now issues a guideline, and says this is how we intend to.
The guidelines have always been there.
Yeah, but
it is. For example, if we are now getting to the point.
Yeah, the interpretation.
Instead of the Electoral Act saying you must do it this way, it is INEC that will say from our guideline, pursuant to the third schedule, F15. This is what we want to do.
But the interpretation of the court, especially the apex court, has been that INEC guidelines is subsidiary to the principal act.
Of course.
Which, like you have said, is also subsidiary. So INEC is making even this guideline in view of the constitutional provision, but they have not been recognized.
Right. We have done lots and lots and lots of election cases.
Yes.
INEC guidelines have always been recognized. But where INEC makes a guideline and there is another provision in a statutory, there's another statutory provision, Electoral Act, Constitution. You cannot, the INEC
guideline cannot head to head.
Gentlemen, in as much as we understand that you've taken us to court, I need you to drop your legal hat at the moment.
No, let's come back here.
And wear the PDP hat for the PDP you're speaking with. But thank you for that clarification.
Thank
If our backroom can also work on the volume, we're being told that volume is low or inaudible in some instances. Ememobong, beyond electronic transmission, and in fact, it's a double-header question I need to ask you as we're rounding up. A lot of opposition have kicked against this, and civil society and many Nigerians, that electronic transmission and the fallback to Form EC8A seems to be very contentious. What would you have advised, given the circumstances that the legislators have given as their reason for patching networks in some areas of the country? Because for the first time, we are seeing electronic voting is now mandatory as against what we saw in 2023 and the Supreme Court. Electronic transmission of results are now legal in our Electoral Act. So that's an improvement, some would say, but you're kicking against it. What would have been the better option for the legislators to do for those areas where they don't have network or patchy network? That's one. On the second hand, there are so many other changes to the Electoral Act. Funding of INEC has reduced. Submission of candidates by parties such as yours has reduced. In fact, the way you nominate your candidate as political parties has also changed. But nobody seems to be highlighting a lot of those. I saw your statement, and you only highlighted electronic transmission of results and party and nomination of candidates. Yes. But there are other potential risks and loopholes here that others have raised. A political party such as PDP, I mean, what are you doing differently? What are you saying, really?
The first is that while we admit that the National Assembly has rights to make rules as to guidelines for elections, and how political parties are administered. But those rules are, if you see how Section 228B is couched in such a way that first you make laws as per registration, and you now make laws that guide. Now, and the fundamental word is that guide democratic, transparent and democratic selection and nomination of candidates. Now, from my experience, between indirect primaries, where they are statutory delegates and they are ad hoc delegates, which forms an electoral college, and indirect, which you have seen in this country through indirect primaries. People have allotted to candidates, who emerge, votes that at the end of it, during elections, the total votes of the people in that community was not up to half of what the candidate had. So which is more transparent, indirect or direct? So
which in your mind is more
No,
transparent?
clearly indirect, that that everyone knows these people, the process of these people coming up. And so we are saying that it is an overreach for the National Assembly to limit. I mean, there is a spectrum of process of selecting candidates. So you shouldn't have gone into a limit to say it has to be either direct or consensus. Number one. Number two,
Very quickly.
see, this is an elephant. So you describe where you touch. So you're going to look at what pains you the most. Civil societies are talking. If INEC is worried about, INEC should also shout, because they are even complicit in this. So we are talking about the most critical in the hierarchy of this. You're going to see that it has to do with electronic transmission and it has to do with nomination of candidates.
Oba Madwabuchi, last word, 30
last
seconds.
word.
Which part of the elephant are you touching here?
Me,
Section 84.
I usually speak as a lawyer. I don't talk politics. My friend never talks politics.
Right.
When the law prescribes a way of doing something, you can't do it in any other way. When people say we want electronic transmission of result, it means that any result that's not electronically transmitted is invalid in Nigeria.
What about that section 84? Direct and
Direct and indirect. That is for him. His politics.
All right, we'll have to look at that.
No, but
Okay.
the
So
electronic
what?
transmission is not, it doesn't invalidate the form EC8A. It is a double check on it. It says that when the presiding officer
And
is
you
done
people
with
were saying that you want it real time.
No, that's not what we said. We are saying that immediately you finish the fiscal form, transmit that particular thing, so that when we get to the collation center, we would see whether what you're bringing physically tallies. It does not remove the primacy of the paper. It doesn't. It doesn't. The paper is there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have to wrap
It
things
doesn't
up.
remove it.
I mean, an interesting conversation here. In Ememobong is PDP National Publicity Secretary, and Oba Madwabuchi, of course, senior advocate of Nigeria. Both of you lawyers, as a matter of fact, aren't you?
He's my lens.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right,
both
now
for
moving
being on
on.
the news. We do appreciate your time.